Hello, 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 hello all. It is time to continue the Demon King. We are on Chapter 5, Old Stories. Han put leaving Marissa Pines as long as Han put off leaving Marissa Pines as long as possible. It was late morning the next day when he said his goodbyes and descended Helena, following the Drinwater toward the Vale. He'd sold or traded everything but the worthless Snagworth, which would have to wait for the Flatlander market. Coins jingled in his purse, and his bag bulged with trade goods, fabric, and leatherwork. He could His bag bulged with trade goods, fabric, and leatherwork he could sell at a profit. Pouches of clan remedies, plus enough smoked venison to make a meal, and the amulet hidden at the bottom. He still mourned the deer he might have taken, but all in all, he'd done well for this early in the season. He hoped Mam would agree. On the way down the mountain, he stopped off at several solitary cabins to see if there was mail to go, or goods to be carried down to the market, or orders for supplies that he would carry up the next time. Many of the cabin dwellers were a clan who preferred life away from the bustle of the camps. There were also former Flatlanders who liked solitude had or had reason to avoid the notice of the Queen's heavy-handed guard. Han earned a little money by carrying news and mail up and down the mountains and acting as agent for those Highlanders who didn't care to visit the Vale. Lucas Frostclay was one of those. His cabin stood where Old Woman Creek poured into the Drinwater. He'd lived on the mountain so long he looked like a piece broken off of it. he looked yeah. He lived on the mountain so long he looked like a piece broken off of it, and with his craggy face and the clothes that draped his skinny body like Jupiter, Jupiter, Jupiter on a hillside. His eyes were opaque and cloudy as a winter sky. He'd been blinded as a young man. Despite his blindness, the old man owned the most productive still in the Spirit Mountains. Though Lucas could navigate the trails and ledges of the high country like a goat, he never went to Fellsmarsh if he had a choice. So Han carried orders and containers and money up from the Vale and product down. The containers were full when he carried them downhill and light and empty when he carried them up. The best part, Lucas had books, not as many as in the temple library, but more books than any one man had the right to. He kept them locked in a trunk to protect them from the weather. What a blind man needed with the library, Han couldn't say. But the old man encouraged him to take full advantage, and he did. Some days he staggered down the mountain with half his weight in books. That was another mystery. Should have Han should have read them all twice over by now. but Lucas always seemed to have new ones. Lucas was cranky and profane, and maybe siphoned off a little too much of his own product, but he was fair to hand, and told the truth, and always paid on time, which was rare. No one had dared steal from Cuffs Alistair, street lord of Ragmarket, but since he'd left the life, Han had been cheated more times than he cared to remember. Lucas was also a non-judgmental source of information. He knew everything, and unlike Ma'am, he'd answered any question without a lecture. The hillside cabin was empty, as was the distillery shack behind, but Han knew where to look. He found Lucas fishing in Old Woman Creek, which he did daily 3 seasons of the year. It was an excuse to sit and doze on the creek bank and sip from the bottle he always kept at hand. His dog, a rough-coated shepherd named Dog, sprawled by his feet. As Han walked up the creek bed toward him, Lucas dropped his fishing pole and jerked around as if startled. The old man raised his hand as if for protection, his face pale and frightened, his blighted eyes wide under his weary brows. "Who's there?" he demanded, sleeves flapping around skinny arms. Like usual, he was dressed in mismatched clan cast-offs and ragmarket finds. Being blind, he wasn't fussy about color. "Hey, Lucas," Han called. "It's just me, Han." Dog raised his head and wolfed appropriatively, then rested his head on his paws, twitching his ears to drive off flies. Lucas's hand came down through, though he still looked wary. "Boy," he said. Lucas always called him boy. You ought to sneak up on folks that way." Han rolled his eyes. He'd come along the water, same as always. Everybody was acting strange today. Han squatted next to Lucas, touching his shoulder so he knew where he was, and the old man started violently "Catching anything?" Han asked, beginning to feel aggravated. Lucas squinting his rimmy blue eyes like it was a hard question, then reached down and hauled a clan-woven fish basket out of the creek. "Catched all of 4 so far." "Those fish for sale?" Han asked. "I can get you a good price at the market." Lucas considered this a moment. "Nope, going to eat these fish myself." Han settled himself back against the tree and extended his long legs in their flatland breeches. "Need anything to go with?" he asked, patting his backpack. "I have dried peppers and tamarind spice." Lucas snorted. "Fish will do me fine, boy." "Anything for Fellsmarsh?" Han asked. Lucas nodded. "A set aside in the dog run." Their business concluded, Han stared out at the rocks pricking the surface of the creek. Lucas still seemed jittery and unsettled. He kept tilting his head this way and that, as if to pick up a scent of a faint sound on the breeze. "You got your cuffs on, boy?" he asked abruptly. "What do you think?" Han muttered, like he could get them off. Lucas seized Hand's arms and dragged back his sleeve, fingering the silver band as if to read the runs by touch. The old man grunted and released Hand's arms, still muttering to himself. "What's with you?" Hand demanded, yanking at his sleeves. "I smell hex magic," Lucas said in typically in- incomprehensible frostily fashion. Hand thought of the amulet in his carry bag. He decided there's no way Lucas could know if it was there. "What do you know about magic?" "A little." Lucas rubbed his nose with his forefinger. "Not enough and too much." Hand tried again. "What do you know about wizards then?" Lucas sat motionless for a long moment. "Why do you ask?" Hand stared at him. Most adults answered questions with questions, but not Lucas. When Hand didn't answer immediately, the old man clamped his hands down on Hand's shoulder. "Why do you ask?" Lucas repeated fiercely. "Ow! Hey, take it easy," Hand said, and Lucas let go. "Dancer and I had a run-in with some wizards up on Helena," Hand said, rubbing his shoulder. He told Lucas what had happened. "Bayer, you say?" Lucas growled and found his fishing pole again. "Thea's bloody, bloody bones." Lucas had been born on the mountain known as Thea, spiritual home of the legendary Queen of the Fells. So he favored Thea when it came to swearing, even though most swore by Helena. Han asked him about it once, and Lucas told him that Helena was too powerful a word to be flinging around. "Do you know him?" Han asked. Lucas nodded. "Know of him. His father more so. Gavin Bayer. He's the High Wizard, you know. Heart as cold as the Drinwaters. Ambitious, too. You don't want to get in his way." Mika Bayer had mentioned his father's high office like blue bloods always did. What else could he want? Han asked, besides being High Wizard. Well, Lucas lifted the tip of his pole, trying the line. "Fellow like Bayer, he's never satisfied. I'm guessing he wants to be High Wizard without all the tethers and restrictions put in place by the naming. Some say he wants the Queen as well." Han was confused. He wants the Queen? She already has a consort, doesn't she? Somebody from Demonian. Lucas wheezed with laughter. "For a street rat, you got no idea what's going on, do you?" He shook his gray head in amazement. "You got to keep your ear to the ground and your nose in the wind if you want to survive in these times." Han couldn't picture how the physical feat could be accomplished if he could never figure out how Lucas knew everything that was going on when he stayed up on the mountain all the time. It was a mystery. Lucas's laughter finally wore out and he wiped tears from his eyes. "Averil Demonia is Queen Miranda's consort, but he's a traitor, and traitors travel a lot. Spends too much time away for his own good, if you ask me, but nobody does." Han struggled to control his impatience. All this talk of politics was boring and had nothing to do with him. "About wizards," he prodded Lucas. "How do they get magic?" "It's in their blood," Lucas said, stroking Dog's head. "It's like they get the raw talent, but they ain't really powerful until they study up and learn to store and control it with an amulet. In fact, they're dangerous until then, like a colt that like a colt that ain't well, broke, and don't know its own strength. Han thought to of Mika Bear, face black with face black with anger, gripping his fancy jinx piece and muttering charms. Why? Do they have to say spells or something to make it work? That's part of the learning up, Lucas said, nodding. The Bayer, he's from Airy House, maybe the most powerful wizard family there is since the fall of the Waterlows. Who are the Waterlows? Han asked. I never heard of them. Never mind that. Never, never mind. That house died out years ago. Lucas yanked up the tip of his fishing pole, felt his way down the line to the lure, then shook his head. Guess they've stopped biting, he said. Maybe it's time to pack it in. Lucas, Han persisted. He knew from experience that things people didn't want to tell you were likely to be the most interesting. Who were the Waterlows? Why did they fall? Boy, you can pester a body near to death. Lucas grabbed up his bottle and took a swig, then wiped his mouth with a grimy sleeve. It all happened 1,000 years ago, don't and it don't matter anymore, he said. When Han said nothing, Lucas snorted. You know, most boys your age ain't interested in digging up old bones and old stories. Han still said nothing. Lucas released a gusty sigh and nodded as if coming to a decision. So 1,000 years ago there was a powerful wizard house named Waterloo. House Sigma was a raven and wizard crest that was in a wizard crest that was a twin serpent. Han blinked at him, then dug in his bag, unearthing the parcel containing the serpent amulet he'd taken from the Jinx finger on Helena. He weighed it in his hand, recalling what Bayer had said. If you even touch it, you'll be incinerated. Lucas turned his sightless eyes on Han. What you got there, boy? He demanded, extending his hand as if he could feel the heat of it, too. Give it over. Han hesitated. I don't know if I... Give it here, boy. The old man's voice rang out, startlingly loud and compelling. It was like Lucas had been possessed by some other irresistible being. Han pressed the leather bundle into Lucas's hand. Be careful, Lucas, it might... Lucas ripped open the leather wrapping and pulled free the Jinx piece. Han leaned away, tensing against any possible explosion. None came. Lucas ran his weathered beaten hand over the amulet and his lined face went slack and with shock. Where did you get this? He whispered. Bayer had it. Han hesitated, unsure how much to share. He tried to use it to jinx Dancer. I took it from him. I don't think he was supposed to have it. Lucas laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Sweet Thea's kiss. I would guess not. Why? What is it? Lucas kept stroking the carving with his thick fingers, as if he couldn't believe what his senses were telling him. It's from the Waterlows, all right. Their treasury of magical artifacts was legendary. An armory more like. No one ever knew what happened to it after the breaking. The purple vein over his right eye pulsed dangerously. I'll wager the snake Mika had no idea what he had. He nodded once. "And now you have it." Lucas extended the amulet toward Han. When Han hesitated, Lucas said impatiently, "Take it, boy. It won't bite." Han took it wearily, weighing it in his palm. It felt pleasantly heavy and warm, vibrating with a power. Han could feel it. Han could feel in his breastbone and in the cuffs at his wrist. Wearing emotions tracked across the old man's face, finally fading to an expression of alarm. Once again, he gripped Han's arm, his long nails biting into Han's flesh. "Does Bayer know who you are, boy? Does he know you have this?" Han shrugged uneasily. "I didn't tell him my name, if that's what you mean." When Lucas didn't look reassured, he added, "Look, I'll give it back if it's that important, all right?" Lucas let go of his arm and drummed his fingers on his thighs, ferociously thinking. "No," he said finally. "Don't give it back. It's too late for that. Keep it hid. Keep it safe. Better Airy House don't have it." He chuckled bitterly. "Stay out of their way, the bears." Han had never seen a bear before now, and doubted he would again unless Mika returned to Elena. Hopefully he wouldn't. "Fine," he said, rewrapping the necklace and stowing it back in his bag. What good was asking questions if you didn't understand a word of the answers? "You were saying about the Waterlows?" "If you want to hear a story, don't interrupt." Lucas rubbed his bristled jaw and returned to his story voice. "The wizards came from the northern isles. They landed on the east coast and conquered the rest of the 7 realms with their high magic. Clan magic couldn't hold against it. It's green magic, stubble stuff, not good in a fight. Strongest magic they is, but made for healing, not destroying. Clan has it because they in harmony with nature. The matricias and the amulet makers, they've learned how to draw on it. Those wizards chose to live in the Vale. They married themselves to the blooded queens and reigned as kings, but they wasn't bound to the queens the way they are today. The succession still came through the true female line. The trouble started during the reign of Helena, the most beautiful woman who ever lived." Han nodded. Lucas had finally strayed onto familiar ground. Helena was handfasted to the wizard name of Kinley Bayer of Airy House, which was powerful then as now. Bayer was set to be king, but there was this young wizard named of Alger, heir to Waterloo House. He fell hard for Helena. That wasn't unusual. Only problem was Alger was powerful and used to getting what he wanted. He saw no reason why he shouldn't have Helena all to himself. The consuls said no, and Airy House especially said no. But Helena, she had a mind of her own. She disliked Bayer, who was an old man to her, cold and heartless as any snake, and she fancied young Alger, who was handsome as she was beautiful. She run off with him, and they holed up in the spirits with his allies, an army of wizards from Waterloo House, and some of his friends, the best and brightest wizards of a generation. Alger proclaimed himself king and married Helena. The council couldn't put up with that, so the other wizard houses marched at Waterloo and laid siege to their hold. Anyone could see it was a lost cause, but not this boy. He was a long-time student of dark magic, and he thought he could conjure a spell that would end the siege and scare the council off. Helena tried to talk him out of it. She wanted to give herself up to Airy House, but he was headstrong and wouldn't listen. Lucas smiled sadly. Boy was a fool for love. Too much power and too little knowledge. They was together only 3 months. Hands shifted impatiently. Stories about Helena and her many suitors were like lengths of old cloth, so worn down by the telling you couldn't tell one from another or even see the individual threads anymore. Lucas stared into space, his milky blue eyes like paint his milky blue eyes like painted over windows that that hid what lay within. Hen was good at reading people, he had to be, but he could never read Lucas. So what happened? Han asked doubtfully. Lucas flinched as if he'd forgotten Han was there. They killed him, of course, after they took him to Airy House and tortured him for days and forced that young girl to listen to his screams. But it was too late. The damage was done. Han blinked, caught by surprise. What damage? What are you talking about? Lucas raised bushy eyebrows. The breaking, of course. You've heard of that? He asked sarcastically. I've heard of the breaking, Han said irritably. What's that got to? His voice trailed off, and he stared at Lucas, wondering if the old man had sipped a little too much product. Hold on, you're talking about the Demon King. He whispered the last 2 words, which people tended to do, and resisted the urge to make a sign against evil. His name was Alger, Lucas said softly, his whole body slumping into a puddle of wrinkled skin and drab cloth. The sun went behind a cloud, and it was suddenly cold on the creek bank. Han shivered and drew his jacket closer around him. Lucas's unfortunate Alger Waterloo was the Demon King. Not possible. The Demon King was the monster in every scary story, the devil you wouldn't name of fear of calling him to you. The one that waited in the dark down a crooked street for bad children to come his way. That's not true, Han burst out, fueled by righteous and can't get that word out. Indecision and a lifetime of stories. The Demon King stole Helena away on her wedding night. He chained her to his dungeon when she refused him. He tortured her with dark sorcery, trying to win her heart. When she resisted, he broke the world. He was a boy, Lucas muttered, fumbling for his flask. They were in love. He was a monster, Han countered, shying a rock into the creek. She destroyed him. He'd seen the frieze in the temple at Felsmarts. It was called the Triumph of Helena, and consisted of a series of scenes. Helena in chains defying the Demon King. Helena beautiful and terrible. holding the world together with green magic as the Demon King tried to shatter it. Helena standing over the Demon King's lifeless body, a sword in her hand. If it carved if it's carved in stone, it has to be true, Han thought. They killed him, Lucas said, and that released a destructive power like the world had never known before or since. He sighed, shaking his head as if it hadn't been the Demon King's fault at all. Afterwards, the wizards meant to marry Helena off to Kinley Bayer. The old man sat up straighter, his eyes oddly clear and focused. His usual quavery voice rang out like a temple's orator's, and his Highland accent fell away. But they had their hands full. The world was breaking, crumbling into chaos. Earthquakes shook their castles down. Flames erupt from the ground. The oceans boiled away and forests turned to ash. Night fell and stayed for months, lit only by the fires that burned day and night. The air was too thick to breathe. Nothing they conjured would stop it. Finally, they had to turn to the clans for help. Disappointment flamed within Han. How had they stayed so far afield from the original question about wizardry? He'd asked a serious question and been repaid with this dreamer's tale. He'd wasted half the morning on the creek bank, the unwilling victim of an old man's fantasies. Now Ma'am would skin him alive for being so late. Thanks for the story and all, Han said, but I've got to go. He scrambled to his feet and slid his backpack over one shoulder. I'll pick up the bottles at the dog run. Sit, boy, Lucas commanded. You got this story started, now you got to hear me out. Fuming, Han settled back down on the creek bank. He never signed on for a monologue. When Lucas was satisfied he'd held his audience, he continued. The clans recognized the lineage of queens, so Helena acted as go-between. Think of what that must have been like, negotiating with the clans on behalf of your sweetheart's murderers. Lucas smiled sadly, but Helena had grown up. She was strong and smart, as well as beautiful. She reclaimed the power of the Grey Wolf line. What grew out of those talks was the naming. Lucas ticked off the tenets of the naming on the gnarled fingers. In exchange for healing the world, the clans put wizards on a short leash. High magic and wizards were forbidden in the spirits. They've confined to the Vale and the Flatlands. The clan's speakers have temples in Fellsmarch, and the queens got to go to the temple once a week to learn the true faith. The Wizard Council chooses the most powerful wizard in the Fells as High Wizards and head of the council. But he is magically bound to the land and the queen and ruled by her. The queens are fostered in the camps as children. Lucas smiled faintly. And wizards ain't allowed to marry our queens anymore because that gives them too much power. Helena agreed to that, Han said. Guess they put the queen on a short leash too, huh? He thought. Lucas nodded, as if he'd read Han's mind. The Queen of the Fells is both the most powerful and the least free person in the entire queendom. She is a slave to duty once she comes of age. But she's the queen, Hand said. Can't she do whatever she wants? Helena had learned the price for following her heart, Lucas said. He paused, his face settling into sorrowful folds. So she bent her knee for the greater good and married somebody she didn't love. Hand frowned. The stories always ended with the destruction of the Demon King and the triumph of Helena, so who did she marry then? Bayer was a wizard, so... Lucas shook his head. Poor Kinley Bayer met with an accident soon after the breaking. She married somebody else. After the rich details of the story so far, he seemed rather sketchy on that point. Hand stood again, then hesitated, shifting from one foot to the other, compelled to say something. You know, Lucas, I'm practically grown. I'm too old for fairy stories. For a long moment the old man didn't respond. Don't ask for the truth, boy, unless you're ready to hear it, Lucas said, staring sightlessly out at Old Woman Creek. Just remember what I said. Keep the amulet hid and stay out of the way of the Bayers. They got too much power as it is. If they find out you have it, they'll kill you for it. And that was chapter 5. Thank you for listening. Have a great day.